Hello and welcome to this hot edition of the Reviews Brothers. Firefighters are awesome. They drive around in big red trucks saving lives and stopping Mr. Nibbles from getting stuck in trees. And every now and then they even get video games based on them. But do they do the hunky buggers justice, or are their streams weaker than a geriatric old man trying to take a leak? Well, how about I shut the hell up and we take a look at some games. Let's start on the NES with Fisher-Price Firehouse Rescue. I can tell you're already excited. In Fisher-Price Firehouse Rescue, you don't in fact go around rescuing firehouses. Instead, you play as a jolly fireman whose sole purpose is to rescue people from their houses that aren't even on fire, and they look pretty damn happy. In fact, if anything, you're probably doing more problems than good. Anyway, they're definitely not trapped in their houses, that's the main thing. Anyway, to do this, you guide your fire truck through some mazes until you find the houses where people need rescuing. Once there, you'll see a person at the window. Just line up your ladder with them and press the A button and you are done. Rinse and repeat. That is literally all there is to the game. There are 4 difficulty levels, and the harder you go, the more complex the mazes get. And if you're on the highest difficulty, you have to find a key to get into the house, and all of that in less than a minute. As you can imagine, it gets pretty intense. Now, to be fair, this is a game clearly aimed at very young children, and in its defence, they would probably get a fair bit of enjoyment out of this. It's simple and easy, and they'll probably finish it maybe in about an hour. The graphics here are very bare bones, and there's no animation at all to speak of. Everything just sort of slides everywhere and doesn't actually move. However, the controls are actually spot on, so there's no complaints there. But should you bother playing this game? Well, no, but it's not made for you. But if you have a toddler knocking about, it'll probably keep them quiet for a few minutes. The Super Nintendo got not one, but 2 games about firefighting, that I know of. Don't at me if there's more. This one is imaginatively titled The Firemen, and is about some firemen. You get called to a job to find a whole skyscraper has caught ablaze, and you need to sort it out before the whole thing collapses. And you know what? It's pretty awesome. There are always 2 characters on screen, but you only control one of them. Sadly, there is no 2-player option, which is really a missed opportunity. Your character has his trusty hose at his disposal, which has unlimited water. Let's not worry about logistics here, it's a video game. And you can fire this straight ahead of you, and you can also aim it down to the ground. You'll need to switch between the 2 firing modes to tackle different fires, as some can only be hit at certain heights. You also have to be careful with the smaller fires though, as you'll need to get pretty close to them, and it can make taking damage more of a threat. You can also crawl, which you'll need to use to navigate debris and dodge fire that's coming from above you. And finally, you do have some water bombs, which you can get your partner to throw. These do massive damage to the fires, but can be hard to aim, requiring the fire to be pretty much in the middle of the screen. You also have quite a limited number of these, but you do find a few as you play. What's surprising here is the depth of the story. It starts off as the simple, oh there's a fire, but soon you'll be rescuing important people and finding out what the cause of the fire really was. And while I did enjoy reading the story, what did bother me is that the text stays on screen for way longer than it needs to, and there's no way to skip it. I guess it's a pretty small gripe, but it's really noticeable. Sometimes the text boxes only have 1 or 2 words in them, but stay on the screen for about 5 or 6 seconds. It's almost as bad as a Sega Lord X title screen. Thankfully though, the rest of the game is a blast to play, no pun intended. Fires rage all over the building and will spread if you don't take care of them efficiently. The flames even make the cleaning robots and other electronics in the building go haywire, so you have to deal with them too. And you even have bosses, which are usually the form of a giant fire that has weak spots and moves in crazy patterns. These are actually really fun to take on. As well as this, you have a radar that starts beeping if it detects any life that needs rescuing. Most of the time you need to rescue people to progress the story, but there's a few here and there that you don't actually have to rescue. However, you wouldn't be a very good fireman if you did let those people die. Also, rescuing civilians replenishes your health, and the game gets pretty tough later on, so make sure you find all those people. Really, the game could be classed as a shooter, and it's a combination that works really well. Everything looks fantastic with a cool art style, and the almost cinematic way the game plays is genuinely impressive. The game was a real surprise to me, and I would highly recommend playing it if you can. It actually manages to make you feel like a bit of a badass. I've been told there is also a Japan-only sequel that came out on the PS1, so I'll definitely be tracking that down at some point. The Super Nintendo also got the Ignition Factor, which plays a lot like the Firemen, but is a little more serious and has a couple of sim-type elements to it. But don't get me wrong, it has nothing to do with the Firemen. Again, the bulk of the game here is about putting out fires and rescuing civilians from burninating. Here, before each mission, you can select your equipment, and you'll need to take different types of extinguishers with you, each of which has different uses and puts out different types of fire. For example, you can't use your normal hose on a chemical fire. You'll also want to take an axe with you, which will let you smash down any locked doors. These are really cool mechanics, and the game does require some trial and error, as you can't just take everything with you. You can only have one type of each equipment, so you might not have what you need the first time you play a level. Thankfully though, you can also sometimes find your fellow firefighters in the levels, and they'll help by replenishing any used items, and sometimes they'll let you swap equipment with them so you can get that thing that you need to put out a fire that you didn't have earlier. The graphics here, they're decent. The fires spread in a way that's about as realistic as you can get on the Super Nintendo, and putting out the fires is just always satisfying. Some of the hit detection here is a bit wonky, and I often got stuck on the scenery, but it didn't really impact the game in any way. Each of the levels has plenty of people for you to rescue, and you get a very strict time limit here too. This was actually my main issue with the game, and I would often just suddenly fail a mission and I wasn't really sure why. There's other things to look out for here, like areas that are filled with smoke. In these areas you'll need to put on your oxygen mask, which makes sense, but it's never really indicated, and really led to a few unfair deaths on my part. One element of the game that I do quite like though is that you can't see in every room all the time. Most of the time you'll need to open doors before you know what's behind it. Often at this point it's too late for you to be able to dodge the fire that's in the room, and you'll just walk straight into it, but it does add a bit of tension. While I wouldn't say this is as good as the Firemen, the Ignition Factor was surprisingly good still. There is a lot of trial and error involved and not many levels to play through, but if you want something a little bit more serious for your SNES, this one is good to try out. If you want some handheld firefighting action, then Rescue Heroes Billy Blaze is your conveniently named man. In this action platformer that I believe is based on a toy line, you play as the titular Mr. Blaze, who is a sturdy chinned fireman, and yep, you go around rescuing people and putting out fires. This time round it's a side-scroller, and you of course have your water gun which fires and dribbles depending on how long you hold the button down for. You'll need to get used to how long you need to hold it down in order to get the smaller fires, as you can't actually aim up and down, which is quite annoying to be honest. You also have a limited supply of water here, but each level does have a water supply though, and you just need to walk past these to refill it. They can also be used as many times as you want, so if you are running low, you just need to backtrack to top yourself up. You never really run out. As you progress, you also find new items. These can be used only on the level you find them on. You can get axes which are used to clear paths, and grappling hooks that let you get across large gaps. It's nice to have these additions and does help mix up the gameplay, which can get a bit annoying. You'd also get bonus levels between each stage where you're flying a helicopter, putting out fires and collecting tokens. These are fine, but a little bit pointless. My main issue with the game though is that it's one of those games where there's civilians hidden throughout the level and you can't progress until you find every last one of them. And of course you don't get any sort of map or radar, which can mean that you're wandering around for ages just trying to find that last block that you didn't realise could be smashed. The levels aren't massive, so it's not really the biggest problem in the world, but it would have been nice to have a little indicator so you can find where that last hidden granny is. Graphically, the game actually looks great. It's got big, well-animated sprites, and everything has a lot of colour. There's a surprising amount of personality here, and rescuing a dog by strapping an Inspector Gadget-style mini helicopter to it is always fun. Now, I'll be honest and say I haven't actually beaten this game, but after playing for nearly an hour, other than different locations to rescue people from, the levels are all pretty similar. And while this is definitely not a bad game, it looks great and the controls really well, but if you've watched any of my videos, you may well have heard me mention that I'm just not a fan of these games that force you to explore every inch of a level just to find that one thing you've been looking for. Having said that, if I did have to play one of those types of games, this one would actually be one that I would consider. I would recommend giving it a go if you like action platformers, but just having to find every single person can get tedious. How about some 3D firefighting now on the PlayStation with Rosco McQueen, Firefighter Extreme? This is a pretty early PS1 game that I remember playing the demo from years ago, and I was excited to find that it's actually pretty cheap these days. I was also excited to find that I enjoyed it now probably just as much as I did back in the day. You play as Rosco McQueen, the most 90s firefighter the world has ever seen. Think Buzz Lightyear if you went to fire school instead of space school. You're a one-man fire-killing army, and unfortunately a load of robots have gone mad and started dropping bombs all over the place which start fires. So you do set out with your axe, hose and a robot drone buddy to make mincemeat of the robots and put out the fires and, of course, rescue civilians. The whole game is played in a third-person view and uses tank controls, which actually are surprisingly good considering the age of the game. You can switch between your axe, which you can use to smash robots, activate switches and break down doors, and of course your hose, which you can use to put out fires. Unfortunately, it's not those kind of hose. Thankfully, the hose has a pretty generous auto-aim, and that is very handy, but it never makes it feel too easy. As long as you're facing the right direction, Rosco will aim up and down for you. You can run out of water though, so do be careful. There are plenty of water bottles laying around though, and you can break lockers and boxes to find more, so you shouldn't really be running out. Lockers also hold other goodies like stronger axes which can break thicker doors. These can only be used on a door once and kind of act like keys in the game. You can also find throwing axes which are great against the bigger robots, and you get stronger water too, which doesn't make much sense, but let's roll with it. The levels here aren't too big, and the main objective is to defeat the robots and to put out the fires. But there are trapped civilians on every level. You don't have to rescue any of them, and they just give you points. However, at the end of each stage, you see the ones that you missed die, which will probably haunt you forever. Or maybe not. The ones you do rescue get teleported away by your robo-buddy, which is pretty cool. There's a good few levels in the game, and thankfully you can save after every few stages, and you even get passwords because they used to exist. I was really surprised at how well this is aged. The cartoony style and the humour is still appealing. The controls, they're definitely not perfect, but are decent for an early PS1 game, and the overall gameplay is actually very addictive. I'm pretty surprised there wasn't a sequel to this, as the firefighting is solid. Later on in the game, the spreading fires can be hard to tackle, but it manages to be fun and not annoying. I would have loved to have seen a PS2 game with better graphics and improved controls, but for now, this is all we have, and yeah, I would recommend playing it if you can. And finally for today, here is Real Heroes Firefighter for the Nintendo Wii. Yep, it's the same story. You're a firefighter sent to various places to put out fires and rescue civilians. I would say it's a boring story, but to be honest, it's exactly what I want when I'm playing a game about being a firefighter. I hadn't played the Wii in a while and forgot that it doesn't exactly have the best graphics around, so while this game is pretty ugly, it's actually not too bad for the Wii, and the majority of what you'll be seeing is flames in the insides of buildings, and these all look typically Wii and fine. What is nice though is that the game has a good few elements to it. You've got a handheld extinguisher that you always carry with you, and you have your main hose, but in this game it does have a limited range. If you walk too far, the hose won't reach and you'll have to leave it behind and resort to a handheld one. Of course you can go back at any point to pick it up, but you can only use it as far as it will reach. Thankfully, there's wall hoses dotted around the building that can use to replace that. You also have your axe, which you can use to smash windows, which lets out smoke and airs places. You also have a crowbar that you can use to open locked doors, and there's even a buzzsaw and a car jack that you'll need to cut people out of blazing vehicles. The game tries to be quite cinematic, with a lot of set pieces, seeing things blow up and trapping you, forcing you to find alternate routes and exits for trapped civilians. You'll even need to throw people over your shoulder and carry them to safety, and I have to say, I really did enjoy figuring it all out. Most of the time, with Wii games, people want to know about the controls, which are often what make or break the game on the system, and honestly, the controls here are fine. You move with the nunchuck and you aim with the Wii remote, so fighting fires is actually pretty accurate. The D-pad switches around between your equipment, and to use your axe or crowbar, you hold the B button which locks your movement, and then you swing the Wii remote. It actually works well and is pretty forgiving. I never had any trouble doing anything I was trying to do. As you're surrounded by fire, you'll likely be dying a fair bit, but you do get a few checkpoints throughout each level. I do wish there were a few more though, as I did have to repeat quite a few large sections of levels after dying, and there was a lot of talking and things that you couldn't skip either. Also, as there's a few scripted scenes, if you're stood in the wrong place, there's times where you can die instantly with no warning. There were times that I would keep dying and I had no idea what was actually killing me, and it turned out I was stood close to a window that exploded, but as I wasn't facing the window, I had no idea that it was killing me. It was just by chance that one time I was checking my phone when the window exploded, and I hadn't quite reached it yet, so I managed to move on past it. Other than that though, I have to say I enjoyed playing this game way more than I thought I would. Some of the fires are huge and really tough to keep under control. There's some cool bits of dialogue that are all terribly acted, but hearing the panicking people blaming each other for starting the fires was surprisingly realistic. And having to smash windows and carry a trapped civilian down a ladder while the building falls apart behind you is always pretty cool. The game is pretty cheap these days, and I really was expecting it to be a terrible bit of shovelware, but actually it's a solid firefighting FPS game that's way better than it has any right to be. So good on you, Rondo Media, the creators of the game, for actually making a decent one. The game actually got a remaster with cel-shaded graphics for the PS4, but I have a feeling from what I've seen that version doesn't actually look as good as this one, so I'd actually recommend getting the Wii version if you do want to play it. So there you go, 6 games based on Firefighters. I was genuinely surprised with the quality of these games, and I'd be up for some more if they made some decent ones. What's your favourite firefighting game? Let us know in the comments below. And no, the modern Alone in the Dark games do not count. Don't forget to subscribe, we upload new videos when we make them. You can also follow me on Instagram, where I have more than 600 video game reviews. Just search for The Reviews Brothers. Now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.